The storm had been calling to her for 3 days now, its voice growing stronger with each crashing wave that battered the rocky coastline of Moonhaven. Isla pressed her palms against the rain-streaked window of her lighthouse keeper's cottage, watching the churning grey waters with an intensity that made her chest ache. The sea was angry tonight, and she could feel its rage pulsing through her veins like liquid fire. Her grandmother's warnings echoed in her mind, spoken in that lilting accent but still haunted her dreams even 5 years after the old woman's death. Asterisk. The sea will claim what belongs to her, child. Fight it all you want, but blood calls to blood. Asterisk. She stepped back from the window, her bare feet silent on the weathered wooden floors. The lighthouse beam swept across the darkness outside, its automated rhythm a steady heartbeat against the chaos of the storm. Isla had inherited this place from her grandmother, along with a collection of strange artifacts, ancient journals written in languages she couldn't read, and a legacy of questions that had no answers. The townspeople of Moonhaven whispered about the Blackwater women, about their uncanny ability to predict storms, and their habit of walking the shoreline during the most dangerous weather. They whispered, but they also came to her when their fishing boats were overdue, when the Coast Guard had given up hope because somehow Isla always knew where to find the survivors. Tonight felt different, though. The pull toward the water was stronger than it had ever been, like invisible threads wrapped around her ribs, tugging her toward the churning surf below. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her heartbeat synchronize with the rhythm of the waves. Her skin tingled with electricity, and when she looked at her reflection in the dark window, her eyes seemed to glow with an otherworldly light. The transformation had been happening gradually over the past few months, ever since her 25th birthday, but tonight it felt like standing on the edge of a precipice. The lighthouse beam illuminated something in the water, a dark shape struggling against the current about 50 yards from shore. Isla's breath caught in her throat as she recognized the desperate movements of someone fighting for their life. Without conscious thought, she was moving, grabbing her rain jacket and boots, her body responding to an instinct deeper than rational thought. The storm seemed to part before her as she ran down the narrow path that led to the rocky beach, the wind whipping her long dark hair around her face like seaweed. She reached the water's edge, just as a massive wave deposited the struggling figure onto the black pebbles of the shore. In the intermittent light of the lighthouse beam, she could see it was a man, his clothes torn and his body battered by the rocks. He was unconscious, but breathing, and when she knelt beside him, the strangest thing happened. The moment her skin made contact with his, a jolt of electricity passed between them, so powerful it made her gasp and pull back. The man's eyes snapped open, revealing irises the colour of amber whiskey, and for a moment they simply stared at each other while the storm raged around them. "You," he whispered, his voice rough with salt water, and something deeper, something that made her bones vibrate with recognition. "Your hair." Before she could ask what he meant, he lost consciousness again. Isla worked quickly, checking his pulse and breathing, her hands moving with practiced efficiency, born from years of tending to shipwreck survivors. But this man was different. His body temperature was too high, his pulse too strong, and when she pushed his wet hair back from his forehead, she felt the same electric current that had shocked her before. His skin was marked with scars that looked almost like claw marks, and there was something wild about his features, something that made her think of wolves prowling through moonlit forests. She managed to get him conscious enough to help her drag him up the path to her cottage, his weight solid and warm against her side. The storm seemed to follow them, battering the lighthouse with increasing fury. But once they were inside, an unexpected calm settled over the small space. Isla helped him to the couch near the fireplace, wrapping him in thick blankets while she built up the fire. The warmth filled the room with golden light, and in that glow, she got her first clear look at the man she had pulled from the sea. He was beautiful in a dangerous way, with strong features and dark hair that curled when wet. His jaw was sharp enough to cut glass, and even unconscious, there was an intensity about him that made the air in the room feel charged. But it was his scent that made her head spin. Pine forests and mountain air, leather, and something indefinably masculine that made her wolf-like instincts stir in ways she didn't understand. She had always felt more connected to the ocean than to the land, but this stranger smelled like everything wild and free about the mountains, and her body responded to him in ways that frightened her. "What's your name?" she asked, when his eyes opened again, clearer now, and focused on her face with an intensity that made her stomach flip. "Cade," he said, his voice like gravel and honey. "Cade Morrison. And you're Isla Blackwater." She hadn't told him her name, and the certainty in his voice made her take a step back. "How do you know who I am?" He sat up slowly, the blankets falling away from his chest, and she tried not to notice the way the firelight played across his skin, highlighting the lean muscles and the strange scars that covered his torso. "I've been looking for you for a long time," he said, his amber eyes never leaving her face. "My pack has been searching for years." "Your pack?" The word sent a chill down her spine that had nothing to do with the storm outside. "What are you talking about?" Instead of answering directly, Cade stood up, moving with a fluid grace that reminded her of predators she had seen in nature documentaries. The blankets fell to the floor, and she realized his clothes were not just torn by the rocks and waves. They were shredded in a pattern that looked distinctly like animal claws. "You don't know what you are, do you?" he asked, tilting his head in a way that was somehow both human and utterly not. "I'm a lighthouse keeper," she said, but even as the words left her mouth, they felt inadequate. "I'm just a woman who lives by the sea." Cade moved closer, and she caught that scent again, wild and masculine and completely overwhelming. "You're so much more than that, Ayla. You're the daughter of two worlds, and you're my mate." The word hit her like a physical blow, and she stumbled backward until her shoulders hit the stone wall of the fireplace. "That's impossible. I don't even know you." "But you felt it," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried clearly over the storm outside. "When you touched me, when you pulled me from the water, you felt the bond form." She had felt something that had made her entire world shift on its axis. But she wasn't ready to accept what he was suggesting, wasn't ready to believe that the strange dreams and instincts that had been growing stronger were anything more than her imagination. "You're in shock," she said, trying to sound calm and practical. "You nearly drowned. You're not thinking clearly." Cade's laugh was low and rough, and it made something deep in her chest respond with an answering vibration. "I didn't nearly drown, Isla. I was hunting." His eyes began to glow in the firelight, and she realized it wasn't just a trick of the flames. I was tracking the scent of my mate across 3 states and 200 miles of coastline. The storm just made it more interesting. You're insane, she whispered, but her body was betraying her. Her pulse was racing, her skin was flushed with heat, and every instinct she possessed was telling her to move closer to him, not further away. Am I? He held out his hand, palm up, and she could see that his fingernails had grown longer, darker, more like claws. Touch me again, Isla. Tell me you don't feel it. She stared at his hand for a long moment, knowing that if she took it, everything would change. The life she had built for herself in this lighthouse, the careful isolation that had protected her from questions she couldn't answer, would be over. But the pull was too strong, the recognition too deep to ignore. Slowly, she reached out and placed her palm against his. The moment their skin made contact, the world exploded into sensation. Images flashed through her mind, wolves running through moonlit forests, the taste of salt spray, and the sound of howling that harmonized with crashing waves, the feeling of being part of something vast and ancient and wild. She could see herself through his eyes, not as the ordinary woman she had always believed herself to be, but as something luminous and powerful, something worth crossing continents to find. Impossible, she breathed, but she didn't pull her hand away. The connection between them was growing stronger by the moment, like roots growing deep into rich soil. Your grandmother knew, Cade said, his thumb stroking across her knuckles with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the wildness in his eyes. She wrote to my Alpha 25 years ago, when you were born. She told him about the prophecy, about the child who would be born of the sea but belong to the wolves. My grandmother never mentioned anything about wolves. Isla said, but even as she spoke, she remembered the strange journals, the books written in languages she couldn't read, the stories about their family that had always seemed more like fairy tales than history. She was protecting you, Cade said, keeping you safe until you were old enough to understand what you are. But now the change is beginning, isn't it? You're feeling the pull of both worlds. She was. The dreams had been growing more vivid, more real. Dreams of running through forests on 4 legs, of hunting by moonlight, of howling in harmony with a pack that felt like family. But she had also been having dreams of the deep ocean, of swimming to depths that should have crushed her lungs, of breathing water as easily as air. The 2 sets of dreams should have been contradictory, but somehow they felt like pieces of the same puzzle. I don't understand any of this, she said, her voice barely audible over the storm that continued to rage outside. I don't understand what I am, or what you want from me. Cade's free hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch warm and electric against her skin. I want you to come home with me, he said simply. I want you to meet my pack, to learn about the wolf side of your heritage. I want to show you what it means to run free under the moon. And to see? She asked, because even now, even with his intoxicating scent filling her senses, and his touch making her entire body hum with awareness, she could still hear the waves calling to her. What about that part of me? His expression grew troubled, and for the first time since she had pulled him from the water, he looked uncertain. That's more complicated, he admitted. The ocean magic in your blood is old, older than werewolf magic. My Alpha believes that with time and training, you could learn to control it, to choose your wolf nature over your sea nature. And if I can't? She asked, though part of her already knew the answer. Then you'll be lost to both worlds, he said, his thumb brushing away a tear she didn't realize had fallen. The sea will claim you completely, and you'll become something that can never return to land. The weight of his words settled over her like a shroud. She had always felt like she was living on borrowed time, like the life she had built was temporary. Now she understood why. She was caught between two natures, two worlds that were fundamentally at odds with each other. The wolves represented pack, community, belonging to something greater than herself. The sea represented freedom, wild magic, the call of depths that had no bottom. How long do I have? She asked. Until the next full moon, Cade said, his voice gentle but implacable. 3 weeks. After that, the change will be irreversible, one way or another. 3 weeks to decide between the only life she had ever known and a future that seemed impossible. 3 weeks to choose between the sea that had shaped her and the wolf who claimed to be her mate. She looked into Cade's amber eyes and saw her own longing reflected there, saw the same desperate need for connection that had been eating at her for years. Will you stay? She asked, surprising herself with the question. Until I decide? His smile was like sunrise breaking over water. Wild horses couldn't drag me away, he said, and then he was kissing her, his mouth warm and demanding against hers. The taste of him was everything she had been craving, without knowing it: salt and earth, wind and fire, the essence of wild things that belonged to no one but themselves. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, the storm outside had begun to calm. The lighthouse beam continued its steady rotation, but the wind had died down to a whisper, and the waves were no longer crashing against the rocks with murderous intent. Isla could feel the change in herself too, the way the electric tension in her body had settled into something deeper, more sustainable. She pulled back to study his face in the firelight, memorizing the strong lines of his jaw, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead, the intensity in his eyes that never seemed to dim. Tell me about your pack, she said, settling back against the couch cushions. Tell me about the world you want me to join. Cade's expression softened, and for the next hour he painted pictures with words of a life she had never imagined. He told her about the Morrison Pack territory in the mountains of western Montana, about vast forests where wolves could run for days without encountering another human soul. He described the pack house, a sprawling log structure that had been home to his family for 5 generations, and the close-knit community of wolves who had become his chosen family. My father is the alpha, he explained, his voice carrying a note of pride mixed with something more complicated. He's led our pack for 30 years, kept us safe from hunters and government agencies that would see us as nothing more than animals to be studied or destroyed. But he's getting older, and the responsibility of leadership will fall to me soon. And he sent you to find me? Isla asked, though she suspected there was more to the story. Cade's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. He didn't send me. I came on my own, against his direct orders. The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Why? Because I've been dreaming about you for 5 years, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Ever since my 21st birthday, when the mate bond first manifested, I've seen your face in my dreams, heard your voice calling to me across impossible distances. My father wanted me to wait, to focus on preparing for leadership instead of chasing what he called fantasies. But I couldn't wait any longer. The honesty in his voice made her chest tight with emotion. She had been having dreams too. Dreams of amber eyes and a voice that called to her from mountain peaks. She had dismissed them as products of her lonely imagination, but now she understood they had been something much more significant. "What happens when we go back?" she asked. "Will your father accept me?" Cade was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "The pack has never had a mate who wasn't fully wolf. Your sea magic makes you unpredictable, potentially dangerous. Some of the older wolves will see you as a threat to pack stability." "Maybe they're right," Isla said softly. "Maybe I am dangerous." "Maybe," Cade agreed, turning to look at her with those intense amber eyes. "But you're also the other half of my soul. I'll face whatever consequences come from claiming you as my mate." The word claiming sent a shiver down her spine that was equal parts anticipation and fear. She understood instinctively that it meant more than just a declaration of intent. It was a magical binding that would tie their fates together permanently. Once claimed, there would be no going back, no changing her mind if pack life proved incompatible with her nature. "I need time to think," she said, though part of her wanted to say yes immediately, wanted to lose herself in the promise of belonging that she could see in his eyes. "I know," he said, reaching for her hand again. "But while you're thinking, let me show you what it could be like between us." This time when he kissed her, she didn't hold back. She let herself melt into him, let herself explore the taste and texture of his mouth, the way his hands felt threading through her hair. The connection between them flared brighter, and she could feel his wolf stirring just beneath his human skin, could sense the barely leashed power that made him vibrate with tension. When his mouth moved to her throat, she arched against him, gasping at the sensation of his teeth grazing her pulse point. "Cade," she whispered, and his name on her lips sounded like a prayer. "I know, sweetheart," he murmured against her skin. "I feel it too." But as much as her body craved his touch, as much as the mate bond pulled them together with inexorable force, Isla knew they couldn't rush this. Too much depended on her decision, too many lives would be affected by the choice she made. With an effort that felt like tearing herself in half, she pulled back from his embrace. "Not yet," she said, though the words felt like glass in her throat. "Not until I understand what I am." Cade's eyes flashed with frustration and desire, but he nodded, releasing her, though she could see the effort it cost him. "Tomorrow," he said, his voice strained. "Tomorrow I'll start teaching you about your wolf nature. But tonight, let me just hold you." They settled together on the couch, Isla's head on Cade's chest, listening to his heartbeat, slow to match the rhythm of the calming waves outside. She dozed fitfully, her dreams full of running wolves and singing sirens, of mountain peaks and ocean depths. When she woke just before dawn, Cade was still awake, his arms tight around her, as if he could keep her safe from the choice she would eventually have to make. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of revelation and confusion. Cade proved to be a patient teacher, guiding her through meditation exercises designed to help her connect with her wolf nature. They spent hours walking the coastline, and gradually Ayla began to feel the wolf stirring within her, a presence that was both foreign and familiar, like remembering a language she had spoken in childhood. Under Cade's guidance, she experienced her first partial shift, feeling her senses sharpen until she could hear heartbeats from a mile away and smell emotions as clearly as perfume. Her strength increased dramatically, and her reflexes became lightning quick. But every step toward her wolf nature made the call of the sea stronger, as if the ocean was fighting to keep what it considered its own. "It's not supposed to be this difficult," Cade said on the 10th day, frustration clear in his voice as Isla collapsed after another failed attempt at a full shift. Most wolves manage their first complete transformation within hours of discovering their nature. Isla wiped sweat from her forehead, her body aching from the effort of fighting between two incompatible magics. "Maybe I'm not meant to be a wolf," she said, voicing the fear that had been growing stronger each day. "Maybe the sea magic is too strong." "Don't say that," Cade said fiercely, pulling her into his arms. "You belong with me, with our pack. We just need more time." But time was the one thing they didn't have. The full moon was only 4 days away, and Isla could feel both sides of her nature gearing up for a final battle. Her dreams had become increasingly vivid, and disturbing visions of drowning in silver moonlight, of wolves with seaweed for fur, of making a choice that would destroy everything she touched. On the 11th day, everything changed. Isla woke to find Cade standing at the window, his body tense with alertness. "What is it?" she asked, immediately sensing the shift in his mood. "My pack," he said, without turning around. "They're here." Isla's heart dropped into her stomach. Through the window, she could see 3 figures climbing the path to her lighthouse, 2 men and a woman, all moving with the fluid grace that she had learned to associate with werewolves. Even from a distance, she could sense their power, their barely contained wildness. "Did you call them?" she asked, though she already knew the answer from the tension in Cade's shoulders. "No," he said grimly. "My father must have tracked my scent. He's come to bring me home." The implications of that statement hit her like a physical blow. If Cade's father was here, it meant her time for deciding was over. The pack would expect him to return with or without her, and if she couldn't prove herself worthy of joining them, she would lose him forever. The knock on the door came 5 minutes later, 3 sharp raps that seemed to echo through the lighthouse like gunshots. Cade opened it to reveal a man who was clearly his father, the same strong features and amber eyes, but with silver threading through his dark hair and an air of absolute authority that made the space feel smaller. Behind him stood a woman with auburn hair and predatory green eyes, and a younger man who looked like he could snap trees in half with his bare hands. "Cade," the older man said, his voice carrying the weight of command. "It's time to come home." "Hello, Dad," Cade said, not moving aside to let them enter. "I told you I wasn't coming back without her. And I told you she's not ready," his father replied, his gaze moving past Cade to settle on Isla with uncomfortable intensity. "The full moon is in 3 days. If she hasn't completed her transformation by now, she never will." "You don't know that," Cade said, but Isla could hear the doubt creeping into his voice. The woman stepped forward, her green eyes never leaving Isla's face. "May we come in?" she asked, her tone polite but carrying an undercurrent of authority that made it clear refusal wasn't really an option. Isla nodded, not trusting her voice. The three wolves entered her small cottage, and immediately the space felt charged with power and tension. The older man introduced himself as Marcus Morrison, Cade's father and alpha of the Morrison pack. The woman was Vera, the pack's better and Marcus's second in command. The younger man was Cole, Cade's cousin and the pack's enforcer. "So you're the sea witch," Vera said, settling into one of Isla's chairs with fluid grace. "You're not what I expect." "I'm not a witch," Isla said, finding her voice at last. "I'm just a lighthouse keeper." Vera's laugh was sharp and not entirely pleasant. "Honey, I can smell the magic on you from across the room. You're definitely not just anything." Marcus moved to the window, looking out at the churning waters with an expression of distaste. "The ocean magic is strong here," he said, more to himself than to anyone else. "Too strong. It's interfering with her transformation." "What are you saying?" Cade demanded, moving to stand protectively beside Isla. "I'm saying she needs to come inland," Marcus replied, turning back to face them. "Away from the source of her sea magic. Give her wolf nature a chance to assert dominance." Isla felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ocean breeze. The thought of leaving her lighthouse, of being separated from the sea that had been her constant companion for 25 years, made her chest tight with panic. "I can't leave," she said quickly. "This is my home." "Home is where your mate is," Vera said, her tone gentle but implacable. "If you truly want to be part of our pack, you have to be willing to make sacrifices." "And if I can't?" Isla asked, though she dreaded the answer. Marcus's expression softened slightly, and for a moment she could see where Cade had inherited his capacity for kindness. "Then you'll lose yourself to the sea magic completely," he said honestly. "And my son will spend the rest of his life mauling a mate he could never truly claim." The words hit her like a physical blow, and she sank into the remaining chair, overwhelmed by the weight of the decision. She looked at Cade, saw the pain and longing in his amber eyes, the way his hands clenched and unclenched, as if he was fighting the urge to reach for her. "How long?" she asked Marcus. "How long away from the sea?" "Until after your first full transformation," he replied. "Once you've successfully shifted and back, the wolf nature will be permanently established. After that, the sea magic will be manageable, a part of you but not the dominant force. And if I don't transform..." Marcus exchanged a look with Vera that made Isla's stomach drop. "Then we bring Cade home alone," he said quietly. The ultimatum hung in the air like a storm cloud. Isla understood that this was her last chance, her final opportunity to choose the life she wanted. She could stay here, safe in her lighthouse with the sea that had always protected her, and watch Cade disappear from her life forever. Or she could take the biggest risk of her life and trust that love would be enough to bridge the gap between two incompatible natures. She looked around her small cottage, at the books her grandmother had left her, at the lighthouse beam that had guided so many ships safely to shore. This place had been her sanctuary, her identity, the foundation of everything she understood about herself. Leaving felt like ripping out her own heart. But when she looked at Cade, when she saw the desperate hope in his eyes, and felt the mate bond pulling her toward him with inexorable force. She knew there was really only one choice she could make. "Okay," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll come with you." The relief on Cade's face was so profound it made her chest ache. He crossed to her in 2 quick strides, pulling her into his arms and burying his face in her hair. "Thank you," he whispered against her ear. "I promise you won't regret this." But as Isla packed her few belongings and prepared to leave the only home she had ever known, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was making a terrible mistake. The sea was calling to her, more urgently than ever, the waves crashing against the rocks with what sounded almost like protests. When she turned for one last look at her lighthouse, she could have sworn she saw figures in the water, women with flowing hair and luminous skin, reaching toward shore with expressions of loss and longing. The drive to Montana took 18 hours, with Cole behind the wheel of a large SUV that smelled like pine forests and wild things. Isla sat between Cade and Vera, trying not to think about how each mile took her further from everything familiar. The sea magic in her blood grew fainter with distance, but rather than making her feel more connected to her wolf nature, it made her feel hollow, like something essential was being slowly drained away. "It's normal," Vera said quietly, apparently reading her distress. "The first time away from your element is always difficult, but it will get easier." Isla nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Through the mate bond, she could feel Cade's concern, his desire to comfort her warring with his determination to see this through. She squeezed his hand, trying to reassure him that she was committed to this path, even as doubt gnawed at her insides. They stopped for the night at a motel in Wyoming, and Isla lay awake, listening to the sounds of an environment completely alien to her. No waves, no salt-scented wind, just the whisper of grass and the distant howl. Coyotes. She missed the lighthouse beam sweeping across her bedroom walls, missed the constant presence of the ocean that had lulled her to sleep every night of her life. "Having second thoughts?" Cade asked softly, his arm tightening around her waist. "No," she said, and was surprised to realize it was mostly true. "Just adjusting. The pack territory is beautiful," he said, his voice warm with love for his home. "Mountains and forests and streams so clear you can see the bottom. You'll love it." Isla hoped he was right, but as they continued their journey the next day, climbing higher into the mountains of western Montana, she felt the last threads of her connection to the sea snap. The absence of that constant presence left her feeling unmoored, like a ship without an anchor drifting in unfamiliar waters. The Morrison Pack territory was indeed beautiful, a vast expanse of wilderness, but seemed to stretch to the horizon in every direction. The pack house was even more impressive than Cade had described, a sprawling log structure that looked like it had grown from the mountainside itself. As they pulled into the circular drive, Isla could see faces in the windows, pack members gathering to catch their first glimpse of their future alpha's unusual mate. "Ready?" Cade asked, his hand warm and steady in hers. Isla took a deep breath, drawing on reserves of courage she didn't know she possessed. "Ready," she said, and stepped out of the car to meet her new family. The pack's reaction to her was mixed, ranging from cautious curiosity to outright hostility. She could hear whispered conversations as Cade led her through the house, fragments of doubt and concern that made her stomach churn with anxiety. The older wolves were particularly skeptical, their expressions making it clear they considered her an outsider who didn't belong. But there were also those who welcomed her with genuine warmth. Elena, the pack's healer, embraced her like a long-lost daughter and immediately began fussing over her pale complexion and the dark circles under her eyes. Thomas, the pack historian, peppered her with questions about her grandmother's journals and the history of sea magic. And the younger pack members seemed fascinated by her, eager to learn about a world beyond their mountain territory. That night, as the pack gathered for dinner in the great hall, Marcus stood to address the assembled wolves. "As you all know," he began, his voice carrying easily over the conversation, "my son has found his mate. Isla Blackwater carries the blood of two worlds, sea and forest, and over the next few days we will help her choose which nature will claim her permanently." A murmur ran through the crowd, and Isla felt the weight of dozens of eyes upon her. She straightened her shoulders, drawing on the same strength that had helped her weather countless storms in her lighthouse. "The full moon is tomorrow night," Marcus continued. "If Isla can complete her transformation and join our pack hunt, she will be welcomed as a full member of our family. If not..." He didn't finish the sentence, but the implication hung heavy in the air. After dinner, Cade showed her to the room they would share, a comfortable space on the second floor with windows that looked out over the forest. It was lovely, but as Isla stood at the window breathing in the scent of pine and earth, she felt the absence of salt air, like a physical ache. "You're still beautiful," Cade said softly, coming to stand behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "Even here, even without the sea, you're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Isla leaned back against his chest, grateful for his warmth and strength. "I don't feel beautiful," she admitted. "I feel empty. That will change after tomorrow night," he said with a confidence she wished she could share. "Once you transform, once you run with the pack, you'll understand what it means to belong here." Isla hoped he was right, but as the night wore on and the full moon rose over the mountains, she felt something inside her growing desperate and wild. The wolf magic that Cade had helped her access over the past 2 weeks was there, but it felt muted, overwhelmed by a different kind of power that was stirring in her blood. She woke just before dawn to find the bed empty beside her. Through the window, she could see Cade in the courtyard below, going through what looked like a series of stretching exercises with several other pack members. Preparing for the hunt, she realized, and her heart began to race with anticipation and fear. Elena arrived with breakfast and a selection of clothes more suitable for running through forests than the lighthouse keeper's wardrobe Isla had brought with her. "How are you feeling, dear?" the older woman asked, her eyes kind but worried. "Nervous," Isla admitted, accepting the cup of herbal tea Elena offered. It tasted of mountain herbs and something else. Something that made her feel slightly more grounded. "That's natural," Elena said, settling into the chair beside the bed. "Your first transformation is always frightening, but you have advantages that most new wolves don't. You're older, more mature, and you have a mate bond to anchor you." "What if it doesn't work?" Isla asked, voicing the fear that had been growing stronger all night. "What if I can't shift?" Elena's expression grew serious. "Then you'll have to make a different choice," she said honestly. "The sea magic in your blood won't be denied forever. If it can't coexist with your wolf nature, it will eventually consume you completely." The words sent a chill down Isla's spine, but she nodded, appreciating Elena's honesty. At least someone was willing to acknowledge the real stakes of what would happen tonight. The day passed in a blur of preparation and anxiety. Vera took her through a series of meditation exercises designed to help her connect with her wolf nature, while Thomas shared stories about other wolves who had struggled with their first transformations. Cabe stayed close, his presence a constant source of comfort and strength, but Isla could see the worry in his eyes growing stronger as the sun sank toward the horizon. As evening approached, the pack began to gather in the courtyard. Isla could feel the excitement building, the anticipation of the hunt that made the air itself seem to vibrate with energy. She changed into the clothes Elena had provided, dark pants and a shirt that would be easy to remove when the time came for transformation. "Are you ready?" Cade asked, taking her hand as they joined the assembled pack. Isla looked around at the faces surrounding her. Some friendly, some skeptical, all watching her with intense curiosity. She thought of her lighthouse standing empty on the rocky coast of Maine, of the sea that had shaped her for 25 years, of the choice she was about to make that would determine the course of the rest of her life. "Ready," she said, and was surprised to find that she meant it. Marcus stepped forward, his presence commanding immediate silence from the assembled pack. The full moon hung heavy and silver above the mountains, casting everything in an otherworldly glow that made the wolves' eyes shine like stars. Isla could feel the pull of it in her bones, a calling that spoke to something ancient and wild within her. "Tonight we welcome a new member to our pack," Marcus announced, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "Isla Blackwater will undergo her first transformation and join us in the sacred hunt that has bound our family together for generations." A chorus of howls rose from the assembled wolves, a sound that made Isla's heart race and her skin prickle with goosebumps. Beside her, Cade squeezed her hand, his warmth anchoring her as the power of the full moon began to build in her blood. "The transformation cannot be forced," Marcus continued, his gaze settling on Isla with paternal concern. "It must come from within, from accepting the wolf that lives in your heart. Trust your instincts, trust your mate, and trust the pack that welcomes you." Vera stepped forward, carrying a small leather pouch that she pressed into Isla's hands. "Wolfsbane and sage," she explained quietly, "to help ground you if the sea magic tries to interfere." Isla nodded, tucking the pouch into her pocket as the pack began to spread out around the courtyard, giving her space while maintaining a protective circle. She could feel their energy surrounding her, wild and electric and alive in a way that made her own magic respond with answering vibrations. "Close your eyes," Cade murmured, his hands coming to rest on her shoulders. "Feel the moon, feel the wolf inside you. Don't fight it, don't try to control it, just let it happen." Isla obeyed, closing her eyes and tilting her face toward the silver light that seemed to penetrate her very soul. The moonbeams felt different here in the mountains than they had by the sea, stronger, more focused, like concentrated energy pouring directly into her bloodstream. She could feel her wolf nature stirring, responding to the call of the pack and the power of the moon. But as the transformation began, as she felt her bones start to shift and her muscles begin to change, something went wrong. The sea magic that had been dormant since leaving Maine suddenly surged to life, fighting against the wolf transformation with violent intensity. Pain lanced through her body as two incompatible magics warred for dominance, each trying to reshape her into something the other couldn't accept. She gasped, her eyes flying open, as agony shot through every nerve. Around her, the pack stepped back in alarm as her skin began to glow with an eerie blue-green light, the same color as deep ocean water. Her hair whipped around her face as if caught in an invisible current, and when she opened her mouth to scream, the sound that emerged was like whale song mixed with human anguish. Ayla. Cade's voice seemed to come from very far away, though she could feel his hands on her arms, trying to anchor her to the human world. Fight it. Choose the wolf. But the sea magic was too strong, fed by 25 years of constant connection, and suddenly desperate to reclaim what it considered its own. Ayla felt herself being pulled in two directions at once, toward the wolf nature that would make her part of Cade's world, and toward the ocean depths that had always called to her soul. Through the chaos of transformation, she heard Marcus shouting orders, felt other hands joining Cade's as the pack tried to help her maintain her human form. But it was too late. The competing magics had reached a critical point, and her body could no longer contain both. With a sound like breaking waves, Ayla's form began to shift, not into a wolf, but into something else entirely. Her legs fused together, covered in scales that gleamed silver and blue in the moonlight. Her fingernails grew long and sharp, more like claws than human nails, and when she opened her mouth to breathe, she could taste salt water that wasn't there. "Impossible," Vera whispered, her voice filled with awe and terror. "She's not transforming into a wolf. She's becoming something else." Ayla tried to speak, to explain what was happening, but the words that came from her throat were in a language none of them could understand, the ancient tongue of the sea, older than human speech. She could see the fear in their eyes, could feel Cade's horror through their mate bond as he watched her become something beyond his understanding. The transformation lasted only minutes, but it felt like hours. When it was over, Ayla found herself collapsed on the stone courtyard, her body human again, but forever changed. She could feel the difference in her bones, in her blood, in the way her heart beat in rhythm with tides that were hundreds of miles away. "What happened?" she whispered, her voice hoarse from screaming. Marcus knelt beside her, his expression grim. "The sea magic was stronger than we anticipated," he said quietly. "It fought the wolf transformation, and won. You're not becoming a werewolf, Ayla. You're becoming something else entirely." "What am I becoming?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer. "A Selkie," Thomas said, his voice filled with the authority of someone who had spent decades studying supernatural lore. "A seal woman, bound to the ocean by magic older than our pack, older than werewolves themselves." The word hit her like a physical blow. Selkie. She remembered her grandmother's stories now, the tales she had dismissed as fairy tales about women who could shed their seal skins and walk on land, but who always returned to the sea in the end. Her grandmother had never told her directly, but the clues had been there all along the family's strange connection to the ocean. The way storms seemed to part around their lighthouse, the dreams of swimming in impossible depths. "How long do I have?" she asked, because she could feel the change continuing even now. Her human form felt like a disguise she was wearing, something temporary that would eventually be discarded. "Until the moon sets," Marcus said, his voice heavy with sympathy. "Then the transformation will be complete, and you'll be drawn back to the sea permanently." Isla looked up at the moon, calculating how much time she had left. Maybe 6 hours, maybe less. 6 hours to say goodbye to the life she had chosen, to the man she loved, to the pack that had tried so hard to accept her. "I'm sorry," she whispered, looking at Cade's stricken face. "I'm so sorry." Cade's expression transformed from shock to fierce determination. "No," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "This isn't over. There has to be another way." "Cade," Marcus said gently, "you need to accept no." Cade's voice cracked like a whip, silencing his father. "I won't lose her. Not like this." He turned to Thomas, his eyes blazing with desperate hope. "There has to be something in the law, some way for a Selkie to remain on land." Thomas looked uncomfortable, his gaze shifting between Cade and Isla. "There are stories," he said reluctantly. "Legends about Selkies who chose love over the sea. But the price? What price?" Cade demanded. "Their sealskin," Thomas said quietly. "If it's destroyed, they're bound to land forever. But without it, they slowly fade away. Most don't survive more than a few years." The courtyard fell silent, except for the sound of wind through pine trees. Ayla felt the weight of every gaze upon her, felt the pack's sympathy and Cade's desperate love. But she also felt the sea calling to her with increasing urgency, felt her new nature pulling her toward depths that promised freedom and power beyond human understanding. "There might be another way," Elena said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something I read in my great-grandmother's journals about hybrid creatures, beings who belong to multiple worlds." Marcus turned to her with sharp attention. "What kind of solution?" "A binding ritual," Elena said, her words coming faster as the idea took shape. "Not to destroy her Selkie nature, but to link it permanently to her mate bond. If she and Cade undergo the ritual before moonset, their souls will be tied together across both elements. She could exist in both worlds without losing herself to either." "What would that mean?" Isla asked, hope flaring in her chest for the first time since the failed transformation. "It would mean you could return to the sea when it called to you," Elena explained, "but you would always be drawn back to land, back to Cade, and he would be able to follow you into the water, to share both sides of your nature." Cade's eyes lit up with possibility. "Could it work?" "I don't know," Elena admitted honestly. "The ritual is ancient, dangerous, and it would change both of you permanently. Cade would gain some Selkie abilities, but he would also lose some of his wolf nature. The pack bond would be weakened." Marcus's expression grew troubled. "Son, you need to think carefully about this. If the ritual fails, you could lose your wolf nature entirely. You wouldn't be able to lead the pack. Then Cole can lead," Cade said without hesitation, his gaze never leaving Ayla's face. "The pack will survive without me. I won't survive without her." The words hit Isla like a wave, overwhelming her with the depth of his love and commitment. She had been prepared to accept her fate, to return to the sea and let him build a life without her. But now he was offering to sacrifice everything for the chance to be with her in both worlds. "Are you sure?" she asked, needing to hear him say it again. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," he said, taking her hands in his. "I don't care what world we live in, as long as we're together." Elena was already moving, gathering the pack members she would need to perform the ritual. "We don't have much time," she said urgently. "The moon is already beginning to set, and once it's gone, the window for the binding will close." The next hour passed in a flurry of preparation. Elena sent pack members to gather herbs and crystals from the forest, while Thomas consulted ancient texts to ensure they had the ritual requirements correct. Vera helped Isla and Cade prepare for the ceremony, explaining what they could expect and warning them about the risks. "The binding will hurt," she said bluntly. "Your souls will be torn apart and rewoven together. Some who attempt it don't survive the process." "We'll survive," Cade said with quiet confidence. "We have to." As the ritual space was prepared in the center of the courtyard, Isla felt the Selkie transformation beginning again. Her skin took on that luminous quality, and she could taste salt water with every breath. The urge to find the nearest body of water and dive deep was becoming overwhelming. "It's time," Elena announced, lighting the last of the ceremonial candles. "Ayla, Cade, take your places in the center of the circle." They knelt facing each other on the stone, their hands clasped between them. Around them, the pack formed a protective circle, their voices joining in an ancient chant that seemed to make the very air vibrate with power. Elena began the ritual proper, her words weaving through languages that predated human civilization. The moment that binding began, Isla felt like she was being turned inside out. Every nerve in her body was on fire. Every bone felt like it was being reshaped from the inside. Through the mate bond, she could feel Cade experiencing the same agony, but also his unwavering determination to see it through. Their souls were indeed being torn apart, she realized. She could feel pieces of herself scattering like stars, mixing with fragments of Cade's essence in ways that should have been impossible. The Selkie magic in her blood reached out tentatively toward his wolf nature, and instead of the violent rejection she expected, the two magics began to dance together, weaving themselves into something entirely new. Power rushed through her unlike anything she had ever experienced. She could suddenly sense every body of water within 100 miles, could feel the pulse of underground rivers and the distant crash of ocean waves. But she could also feel the heartbeat of every wolf in the pack, could sense their loyalty and love as clearly as if it were her own emotion. Through it all, Cade's presence remained constant, his soul intertwining with hers until she couldn't tell where she ended and he began. She could feel his wolf nature, wild and free and fiercely protective, and he could feel her connection to the endless depths of the sea. When the ritual finally ended, they collapsed together on the stone, breathing hard and shaking from the intensity of what they had experienced. Isla looked up at the sky to see the moon disappearing behind the mountains, but for the first time since leaving Maine, she didn't feel the desperate pull to return to water. "How do you feel?" Elena asked, kneeling beside them with concern clear in her voice. Isla took inventory of her body, her magic, her connection to the world around her. She could still feel the sea calling to her, but it was no longer a compulsion. It was an invitation. A promise that she could return whenever she chose, but that she would always have an anchor to bring her back to land. "Different," she said finally. "Complete." Cade helped her to her feet, and she marveled at the way she could sense his emotions as clearly as her own. The mate bond had always been strong, but now it was something deeper, more fundamental. They were truly two halves of crew. One soul. Can you still shift? Marcus asked Cade, his concern for his son clear in his voice. In answer, Cade closed his eyes and let his wolf nature flow through him. The transformation was different now, smoother, quieter, touched with the fluid grace of ocean currents. When he opened his eyes, they held flecks of blue-green, mixed with the amber, like tide pools reflecting sunlight. I can still lead the pack, he assured his father, but I can also follow my mate into whatever world she chooses to explore. Over the following weeks, Ayla learned to navigate her new nature. She could shift into her seal form at will, diving to depths that would have crushed human lungs. But she always returned to the pack house by evening. Cade joined her on many of these aquatic adventures, his enhanced abilities allowing him to hold his breath for impossible lengths of time and swim with seal-like grace. The pack adjusted to their unique alpha to be and his unusual mate. Some of the older wolves never fully accepted Isla's sea magic, but the younger generation embraced the new possibilities she brought to their understanding of the supernatural world. Children followed her around the territory, fascinated by her stories of underwater kingdoms and the ancient magic that flowed through ocean currents. But it was the night, 3 months later, when Isla stood on the shore of a mountain lake with the full moon reflecting off the water, that she truly understood what the binding ritual had given them. Cade emerged from the forest behind her, no longer just her mate, but her partner in every sense of the word. The sea is calling again, she said without turning around, knowing he would understand. Then we'll answer, he replied, moving to stand beside her. Together, they dove into the lake as one, Aisla in her seal form, and Cade with his wolf-enhanced swimming abilities. The water welcomed them both, and as they swam toward the deeper parts of the lake, Isla felt the profound contentment of someone who had finally found their place in the world. She belonged to the sea, yes, but she also belonged to the mountains, to the pack, to the man who had been willing to sacrifice everything for love. She was no longer caught between two worlds. She had become the bridge that connected them. When they surfaced in the center of the lake, treading water under the silver moonlight, Cade reached for her hand. No regrets? He asked, his voice carrying clearly across the still water. Isla looked back toward the shore, where she could see the lights of the pack house twinkling through the trees. Tomorrow there would be pack business to attend to, training sessions for the younger wolves and the daily responsibilities of their life together. But tonight, there was just this, the magic of water and moonlight, the bond that tied their souls together and the infinite possibilities that stretched out before them. None, she said, bringing his hand to her lips for a gentle kiss. The sea called to me, but you gave me a reason to answer the call of the land as well. I've never been happier. As if in response to her words, a pod of seals surfaced around them, their dark eyes curious and welcoming. Isla recognized them somehow, knew they were drawn by the Selkie magic that flowed through her blood. But when one of them approached, nosing gently at her hand, she felt no compulsion to join them permanently. Her place was here, with Cade, building a life that honored both sides of her nature. They swam together until dawn, racing through the clear mountain water and diving to explore the rocky bottom of the lake. When they finally returned to shore, the sun was painting the mountains in shades of gold and rose, and Isla felt more at peace than she ever had in her lighthouse keeper's cottage. Ready to go home? Cade asked, wrapping a towel around her shoulders as she shifted back to human form. Home. The word had new meaning now, encompassing not just a place, but a person, a pack, a way of life that embraced all the contradictions that made her who she was. She was the daughter of two worlds, the mate of an alpha, the bridge between sea and forest. "Ready?" she said, taking his hand as they walked back toward the pack house together. Behind them, the lake reflected the morning sky like a mirror, and ahead of them, their future stretched out bright with promise. As they crested the hill that led to the house, Isla could see Elena in the garden, already preparing herbs for the day's healing work. Cole was leading a group of teenage wolves through combat training in the courtyard. Marcus stood on the main porch with his morning coffee, surveying his territory with the satisfaction of an alpha whose pack was thriving. This was her world now, as much as the ocean depths had ever been. She had found her place not by choosing one nature over another, but by finding a way to honor both. The sea would always call to her, and she would always answer, but she would also always return to this mountain pack that had welcomed her with open hearts. The alpha wanted her, and she belonged to the sea. But more than that, she belonged to herself. She had become exactly who she was meant to be, a creature of two worlds, bound by love to the man who had been willing to transform himself for the chance to share both her natures. As they reached the house, Cade pulled her close for a kiss that tasted of salt water and mountain air, of ancient magic and new possibilities. Around them, the pack continued their morning routines, accepting and celebrating the unique love story that had brought their future leaders together. Isla smiled against Cade's lips, thinking of her grandmother's journals and the prophecies that had led to this moment. The old woman had been right. Blood did call to blood. That sometimes, if you were very lucky, love called even louder, offering bridges across impossible chasms and bonds strong enough to unite the most disparate worlds. She was the alpha's mate, the sea's daughter, and her own woman all at once. And, for the first time in her life, that felt like exactly enough.